What are the craziest small-town stories from where you grew up? One of my friend's uncles, let's call him Rob, acquired a pet raccoon. He named it Cuddles, and one day Cuddles went missing. So he goes out to the road to check to see if she's been hit by a car, and sure enough, there was a raccoon there, obviously dead. He picks up the raccoon and brings her back to his house and then starts to dig a grave for it. During this time, Rob is calling all his friends and family, inviting them out for a funeral for his dead raccoon. We all show up with food and beer. Rob is crying and finishing up burying the dead raccoon when all of a sudden, Cuddles shows up and starts tugging on his pant leg while he was shoveling. Now, we were all there already with food and beer, so instead of a funeral, we had a celebration for the return of Cuddles. Party included beer, a band, and a pig roast. Rob and Cuddles are often seen together at the various mud bogs my town has. If you don't know what a mud bog is, it's when you drive your usually big pickup truck through a pile of mud and see how far it can be driven through before it gets stuck. Also involves a lot of drinking. More small-town stories. My grandfather, who I lived with when I was a young child, used to play pranks on us. One of his favorites was to go down to the road and pick up possums and then place them in boxes. He'd tell us he'd gotten us a surprise and to slowly open the box. Scared the crap out of me seeing a possum play dead staring up at me. Finally, the umpteenth time of him doing this, I'd learned not to open boxes from Granddad anymore. High school classmate brought to school a decaying human skull he found on his farm. He wasn't sure what it was. It came from a man who'd been murdered in the winter and then stuffed into a drainage tube on this guy's farm. When spring came, thawing snow and rain washed the remains out into the clearing where my friend found the skull. My hometown once had its major roads shut down because a rafter of wild turkeys decided to hang out in the street for a day. Why do I get the feeling like you telling this story is just because you got to say the phrase rafter of turkeys? I got a parking ticket for $5 for blocking a sidewalk. When I didn't pay it in time, they added on a $2 late fee. In Jefferson City, Missouri, the tickets are $3. Lobbyists visiting from bigger cities are said to skip on paying the meter and frame the tickets in their offices. The narrator should note that these stories and the prices are from the early 2010s and have almost certainly gone up at least a little in the intervening time. Stop loading up your cars for Jefferson City, it might be at least $7 now. A few years ago, a friend of mine unsuccessfully, thank goodness, tried to self-delete by taking a bunch of pain pills. He was taken to a small hospital in Millen, Georgia. I was living in Atlanta at the time, so some friends and I drove in to check on him. When we made it down to the hospital, we were asked to wait outside his room while a nurse was in the room attending to our friend. While we were standing in the hall, a man dressed in coveralls walked up to us. He was obviously a mechanic by the way of oil stains on his coveralls and the strong smell of grease. We struck up a conversation with him and he told us he'd been down the street at the local mechanic shop, suspicions confirmed, and he walked down to check on, what I now assumed to be, our mutual friend. He moved to walk into the room and we told him everyone was supposed to wait outside until the nurse was done in the room. "Oh, it's okay," he says, pulling a stethoscope out of the pocket of his coveralls. "I'm the doctor." I was an EMT for a small company. One of our trucks hit a deer in a neighboring jurisdiction. An argument ensued over who got to keep the deer. Another one, a man high on crystal threw the cash register at the store clerk. After a pursuit that ended when he was captured on the roof of a bowling alley, he ended up in the hospital for having a broken ankle, running. A tiny emergency room means he's placed in one of two neighboring beds. The other one was occupied by the store clerk. Hilarity ensued. I lived next to a farm in Siler City, North Carolina. One day as a kid, I walked down the road to explore under the bridge on my road. To my surprise, I found a bag full of rotten cow carcasses. How many cow carcasses can fit in a single bag? Depends on how rotten they are, I'm sure. I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona in the 80s. As a kid, one of my favorite places to go with my father was Ruff's Shooting and Liquor Store. And it was exactly what it sounds like, a combination weapon and liquor store. Another Flagstaff story, there was a small airport outside the town, very small. In the morning, the elk would come through the tree line and lay on the asphalt runway because it was warm. So every morning a bunch of guys would go out onto the runway and basically run around screaming and clapping and flailing their arms to chase the elk away so that the airplanes could do what they do, mostly taking off, landing, and occasionally sliding into a field. Eventually, the elk got used to that, so then they figured that one guy could go out, fire a shotgun into the trees, and the elk would take off. Then they got used to that too. So it ended up every morning these guys would go out onto the runway and basically kick, hit, and harass these elk until they finally got sick of it and wandered off. This went on for years until some genius, obviously not a local boy, came along and determined that putting up a fricking fence might go a long way in alleviating the Flagstaff Pulliam Airport's elk problem. With regards to your first, I thought that weapon and liquor stores were a common thing. Maybe I live in redneck land as well. There's another store not too far away, in northern Maine of all places, that sells weapons, liquor, and wedding gowns. I crap you not. I don't know if it's still there, but it was the butt end nowhere in Wisconsin near Lake 10. Yeah, that's its name. There was a Casey's that functioned as an ice cream parlor, a pizza place, liquor store, weapons and ammo shop, baits and other fishing supplies, grocery store, fireworks stand and gas station, all at once. It was truly a general store. I remember their homemade ice cream was really good too, but I might be seeing that through my nostalgia lenses. For the curious, I think it was Price County. It's been a decade since I've been there, but the Lake 10 in Wisconsin's Department of Natural Resources matches pretty well with the fishing I remember being there. My parents were from small towns, but then were stationed up in a very small town in Maine, say about 800 people, where we lived for a while we were kids. My mum decided one day to move some furniture around. She finished and walked down to the post office to pick up the mail. She was stopped twice by other ladies who asked why she moved her furniture. Yep, moving your furniture was such news that her neighbor felt obliged to call around and tell people about it, and they all felt obliged to comment on it. Yeah, those kind of creepy encounters were a daily part of my life when I lived in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, as a kid. My brothers and I were well known without knowing anyone else in the town, because it's not every day 2 wards of the state are sent in to live with their lesbian aunt. Every day someone was calling us by our names and asking about stuff that I felt they shouldn't have known. It was so weird to me as I lived in a big city before being shoved off to a town of 300 people. Funny thing is, I went to a school about 10 miles away in a slightly larger town of 1,500. When I moved back to the city, my graduating class had over 400 and the whole school about 1,400. Something what the frick, I delivered papers with my brother and 2 cousins in our small town, and it was well known that Charlie's radiator shop was actually a crystal front. I had the pleasure of walking about a mile into the country every day to Charlie's house to deliver his paper. I never had any trouble, but as a 12 or 13-year-old girl, it was pretty terrifying. Grew up in a little town in Alaska. April 1st, 1974, a guy hired a helicopter to bring hundreds of old tires to the dormant volcano that can be seen from town. He set them on fire, scaring the crap out of everybody. That is simultaneously an amazing prank and a signal that there was absolutely nothing going on if that's how bored the town's presumably richest man was filling his time. Probably spent someone's monthly salary to do that. So my family is visiting my uncle in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, at the family farm where my dad grew up. As luck would have it, I have to have my appendix removed. This sucks because I was a boy of 11, and the big fun of visiting my uncle on his farm is the go-karts and motorbikes, and now all I can do is shoot the .22 because of the stitches. So we need to go to the hardware store in the small town of 500 people to buy .22 rounds. I walk in with my dad and immediately go to the counter. The guy looks at me and says, "How are you feeling?" I say, "Huh?" He says, "You had your appendix removed." "Okay," I say. Now, I've never met this man before, nor been in his store, and we've only been in the store for 5 minutes. The man laughed. "Oh, you're wondering how I knew. So I read this in the newspaper that John, incidentally the name of my grandfather as well, was admitted to the hospital for an appendix being removed, and I thought it was your grandfather. Then I remember hearing that your father was visiting and his name was John. Then you and your dad came in and I recognized him from when he used to come in, and I figured you were the one with the appendix removed." As we left, I asked my dad, "When was the last time you were in the store?" "Dad, 30 years ago when I was 8. I think the weirdest part of the story is that having your appendix removed was newsworthy. Oh, seriously, our town's local journal printed a story that my dad and his girlfriend once visited me when I was living in the big city for college. I still live in the city. There's no way I'm moving back to that. I don't want to make the front page. I once lived in a small town in the Appalachians, and I have a story somewhat similar to yours. The town was too small to support any kind of hospital, but they had a diner that functioned as both the local watering hole and the doctor's office. The doctor owned the place and also served as the main cook. You could sit at the bar next to someone and not know if they were getting something to eat or if they were getting inoculated. The town was very, very small and remote. The schoolhouse I went to was the smallest public school in that state by a long shot. The senior class, the school went K-12 and only had about 40 kids, and not all of them lived in town, did a family tree project and discovered that they were all related. Not even distantly, it was like third cousin or something. The punchline? They still had prom. Also, our neighbor, who lived somewhat close as the crow flies, but about 45 minutes driving through the mountains, gave my mum her old wood-fired range because she had been hooked up with electricity and didn't need it anymore. Keep in mind that this was in the mid-90s. I have too many stories about that place and the crazy folks who lived there. I didn't think any towns like that still existed, but they're out there. They're kind of like time capsules. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. I remember we had this old guy we called the Gum Man. He would hang out in the local Piggly Wiggly, a grocery store, all day and ask little kids if they'd gone to church that week. If you told him you had, he'd give you a piece of gum. It was only later in life that I found out he wouldn't give any gum to black kids, only white. After typing this all out, I realized how creepy the whole thing actually was.
Piggly Wiggly, that's the very definition of the South. I'm sure when you enter that store, there's some kind of temporal displacement thingy-majig, and you get transported right back to the 1950s, which might explain what you saw, right?
My rural Washington state town was one of those little pockets of bigotry that people forget exist in the Northwest. We had precisely one Jewish family for a while, but they moved away soon after an elementary school teacher told one of their little girls that she and her family had killed Jesus. We also had exactly one black police officer, out of around 4 total, who was constantly treated terribly and assigned crap work until they finally fired him for no good reason. There's still a lawsuit pending about that, I believe, and in both those instances, someone wrote an anonymous letter to the local paper saying that the buttholes involved represented the silent majority of the town. We also had the typical hillbilly crystal problem. That made headlines when our sole 3-unit apartment complex blew up in the middle of our minuscule downtown area. Then there was the time that the local pagan family decided to do a midnight ritual on a railroad bridge and they all got hit by a train. You can imagine what the silent majority thought about that business. On top of all of that, our high school mascot was a potato. We had a dog run for mayor, and Lewis and Clark mentioned us in their journals as the place where they got a particularly crappy night's sleep.
I can't be the only one that's cracking up at the image of a high school pep rally full of young kids cheering on the hometown potatoes.
Not only were they cheering the potatoes, they were occasionally encouraged in their efforts by a student in a potato costume that basically looked like a very angry and aggressive Mr. Potato Head wearing a crown. He would mimic and occasionally playfully make overtly creepy moves on the cheerleaders, and sometimes would lead us in a dance called the Mighty Spudder. Also, our elementary school children were known as the Tater Tots. Small town in central or southern Illinois, a man's horse died and he hadn't taken it to the dump. Some drunk rednecks got together about a week after it died and decided they should take it instead. They tied it behind their truck and started dragging it to the dump, but decided it would be more fun to drag it around the square a few times. This was fine until the skin tore and it started leaking horse fluid and parts all over the pavement. And here was me thinking that people would bury a creature like that rather than taking it to the local rubbish tip. The more you know. Also, I guess these guys literally painted the town red. Or the town square, anyway. Rural Colorado. Our dog died while we were away, and the vet didn't have a fridge big enough for it. We really wanted to bury him at home, so he went into the fridge of the local restaurant for a few days. Dad says it was really hard to dig the hole because the dog was near frozen with his legs all sticking straight outwards, and he had to make it bigger than usual.
Bigger than usual? Do you bury a lot of dogs?
My hometown has an endless supply of these stories. Every spring, my hometown has a livestock festival, a week-long celebration of livestock. One lucky high school girl is crowned the Livestock Queen and presides over the festivities, a prestigious position to be sure. During the Livestock Week, tickets are sold to an event called Cow Patty Bingo, in which an indoor showroom is divided into over 100 small squares and a cow is released onto the floor. If you're lucky enough to have the cow crap into the square you'd chosen, you, my friend, are a winner.
My high school tried that. The cheerleaders chased it all over the place and it was so frightened by the 30-odd random screaming girls that it attacked one, and then promptly busted down the gates and fled. That was the last time my high school tried that. I was offered $50 to cast a curse on NASCAR.
But did you?
I was trying to persuade them to be more skeptical of magic, although Dale Earnhardt is dead anyways, so it might be a lost cause.
My next-door neighbors divorced. The mother won the house. When we moved away, the father bought our house. They're now both in homosexual relationships, living as next-door neighbors. I was 16, hanging out on the roof of a local establishment, because what the frick else are you going to do in small-town America, and a cop in uniform, who was drinking, offered me a beer. 25 now, and I still occasionally get ID'd, so it's not like I even looked older than I am. I went to a field party in West Virginia after bailing my buddy out of jail for a DUI. When we got to the party, his arresting officer was there and they drank a beer together. Later, the cops brought out boxing gloves so they could box some people at the party. A DUI in West Virginia was a $500 fine. I grew up in Memphis, but I used to go to this really small town in Arkansas a couple of weekends a month. I got a bowl cut with an actual bowl on my head by a barber with 3 fingers on one hand. I live in a small town. We have a saying, you don't lose your girlfriend, you lose your turn. Cue banjo. My neighbor was known to bring in junkies, and one of them was a smack addict. Well, this guy disappeared, and after about 3 weeks, a smell started coming from one of my neighbor's numerous camp trailers in his yard. They checked it out and the guy was dead in there. The autopsy reported that he'd had heart failure due to injecting pine sap because he ran out of smack. I have a lot more stories. I grew up in a town of less than 500 peeps. I was hanging out with my grandma's neighbor's 2 kids. Wes, the boy, wanted to go back in the bush. We lived in a rural area, and so his grandmother let him take me and my sister down the back road on an ATV. We were back there barely 10 minutes before we came across the most horrible stench I've ever smelled. Wes drove towards the smell and we found a cow graveyard. There were 25 or more dead cows in various states of decay. Wes's sister said she was going to throw up, so we left. Not really that what the frick, but I was quite young and had nightmares about zombie cows for months. Little children, including my sister, set out on the school's environment day to pick up trash in the woods. We found a World War II bomb. Maybe not a true what the frick story, but my favorite, my hometown is so small or so country story is that at our county fair there was a girl in my high school class that was a finalist in both the beauty pageant and the arm wrestling tournament. I was buying beer in a very small town in central Oregon. It was just a store or gas station on a state highway. As a young-looking 21-year-old, I carried my passport with me because I figured it was better and more believable ID. I got carded and handed him over my passport, and he said, "I asked for ID, not a book." My brother's university is in a town that's pretty much literally in a cornfield. The instructions on the school's website literally say, turn left at the stop sign, because there's only one in the entire town. University of Minnesota, Morris. Colder than Hoth and nothing but corn and alcoholism for miles. My local Walmart has a hitching post. That is all. Your town is the closest any of us will come to playing Red Dead Redemption in real life, and the rest of us are poorer for not having a hitching post outside our local megamarts. We had this local crazy lady. Everyone called her Crazy Tina. She was messed up. Apparently at one time she was a normal person and had a family and everything, and then she started doing a bunch of substances and kind of lost it. But man, some of the stuff she did, crazy. She had a garden in her front yard, which sounds normal, but she was growing rubber boots. Yeah, she had planted like 20 or so rubber boots with just the tops peeking out, and she had another 30 or so just in a huge pile. It's been there as long as I can remember. She decided one day that she was going to paint her house, which again, sounds kind of normal. Except instead of doing it like a normal person, she bought a can of spray paint, and instead of spray painting like a normal person to get even coverage, she just freaking sprayed it all over. That led to more people going up to her house and spray painting members and crap on it. Then I guess she got tired of it, so she ripped off like half her siding. Not all of it, just half. And she was the only person in the entire town to have bars on her windows. I don't really live in a town where people put bars on their windows. She's literally the only person here who's done that. And if you ever walk down the street she lives on, holy crap, she'd be yelling, "Get the frick away from my house!" And then you'd have to run away from her and everything. She was nuts. She was like the crazy cat lady from The Simpsons, but had no living cats. And yeah, apparently she was once completely normal and a nice person. My mum went to school with her, and then something just went off in her brain and she was never the same way. You can always tell when the seasons change in my town by a man named Leon who walks everywhere. He's an older Native American man with long dark hair. When it starts to warm up every year without fail, he starts to wear his cut-off jean shorts. His legs are always shaved and he oils them down. He completes his look with a button-up Hawaiian shirt, a safari hat, and Keds. An oldish lady, I'd say around her 50s, who was clearly 2 sandwiches short of a picnic, used to walk around town every day with her dog and just muttering things to herself. Her dog died while she was walking it, but she didn't notice and spent most of the day dragging a dog around the village until someone felt the need to mention it. Pretty sad. Also, I never saw her again much after that. I briefly dated a girl in high school that started doing the deed with her ex-stepdad and later married him. This guy is 25 years older than her and has a daughter with her mother. So in the end, she became her sister's stepmother. Thank God I got out of that relationship and that crap hole town. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.